Hello, and thank you for your interest in the Prince George's County Historic Property Grant Program. My name is Daniel Tanna, and I'm a planner in the Historic Preservation section of the Prince George's County Planning Department, which administers this program on behalf of the Prince George's County Planning Board. This video covers the application process and timeline for the fiscal year 2027 grant round, which will begin accepting applications in July of 2026. If you registered for a workshop, you should have received a confirmation that includes these attachments. If you did not, and you're watching this video, these documents can be found and downloaded at the following website: https://www.pgplanning.org/focus-areas/historic-preservation/grants/. The attachments include grant application instructions, the application form itself, supplemental photo pages which can be used to submit the required photos that go along with your application, a sample grant contract, and a document containing frequently asked questions about the easement. This is the 19th year of the Historic Property Grant Program. Over that time, the Prince George's County Planning Board has awarded over $6 million to 195 grantees. The purpose of the Historic Property Grant Program is to assist in the protection, preservation, and enhancement of historic properties through the award of historic property grants. The size of an individual grant award can be up to $50,000. At this time, we are unsure what the total amount of available funding will be for fiscal year 2027. But last year, the requests exceeded the available funding by a significant amount, so keep in mind that the program is competitive and funding is not guaranteed. Before we get into the application, I wanted to give everyone a sense of the timeline for the grant process. The key takeaway is that the grant process can take quite a bit of time, and applicants should not expect to begin grant-funded work for at least a year after the application period. Properties that are receiving their first award and properties that are not yet designated as Prince George's County Historic Sites should expect for grant-funded work to not be possible until even later. Some of the key dates for this year are Friday, August 28th, the deadline for applications. Applications will be accepted via email until 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time on Friday, August 28th. Any applications received with a timestamp later than that will not be accepted. After this, staff will review your application and provide you with detailed feedback. You will have the opportunity to make revisions or corrections until Friday, September 11th, the deadline for revisions and additional information if necessary. Please note that no new applications will be accepted after August 28th. In September and October of 2026, the applications will be collated and prepared for the Grant Committee. Then, the applications will be reviewed by the Grant Committee, who will make funding recommendations to the Historic Preservation Commission in a public hearing, which applicants will be invited, but not required, to attend. The Historic Preservation Commission will in turn form recommendations that will be presented to the Prince George's County Planning Board, which will make the final award determinations sometime in late December of 2026 or January of 2027. Once the awards have been made, Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission legal staff will prepare grant contracts, which will be sent to grantees for signature before being returned to the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission for the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission Executive Director's countersignature. Grantees will also need to register as vendors with Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission in order to be able to receive grant payments. At this point, the easement process and/or historic site designation process can begin, and historic area work permit applications can be submitted for any grant-funded work that will require an approved permit. Eligible properties include designated Prince George's County Historic Sites and Resources, properties that are individually listed on the National Register of Historic Places, or properties that are contributing resources within a Prince George's County Historic District or National Register Historic District. Please note that properties within the City of Laurel are not eligible, as they are regulated under the city's municipal code rather than the county's historic preservation ordinance. Please note that if your property is not a designated county historic site and falls into one of the other eligible types of property, this will add a few steps to your post-award process, as you will have to request an evaluation to become a county historic site before the easement can be recorded. Eligible applicants include individuals, nonprofit organizations, and incorporated municipalities in Prince George's County. Successful applicants must wait at least 1 year before reapplying. So, for example, if you are awarded a grant in fiscal year 2027, You would not be able to apply for another one until at least fiscal year 2029. I encourage everyone to read the sample grant contract before applying, but I also want to provide a summary of the key points that are contained in it. First, while you don't have to be a regulated Prince George's County Historic Site to apply for the grant, you do have to be one before you can start doing grant-funded work, and the contract includes language to that effect. Second, all grant-funded work must comply with the Secretary of the Interior's standards. Staff will review your application and provide feedback to this point. So if you are unsure if your proposed scope of work is in compliance with this item, please make sure to get your application in a little early so that you have time to make any necessary changes. Third, the grantee agrees to provide a 10% match of the gross award amount. Fourth, the grantee is agreeing to the donation of a perpetual historic preservation easement to the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission. This part is very important, and I'll spend more time later in the presentation getting into specifics about the easement. Fifth, grant funds will only be issued as reimbursements for completed work. No grant funds are given up front. Lastly, grant awards may be taxable. The Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission will issue a 1099 form for any calendar year that you received reimbursement payments from your grant award. If you are concerned about the tax implications of a grant award, please consult with a tax professional for guidance. Next, I'll walk you through the application step by step. But before we get started, here are a few important points about the application. First, applications must be submitted electronically via email to historicpreservation@ppd.mncppc.org. We recommend that you use the most up-to-date version of Adobe Acrobat or Acrobat Reader to ensure compatibility when filling out the electronic form. You may also want to compose your longer answers in a text document and then copy and paste them into the application form once completed. The application form can also be printed, filled out by hand, and scanned, as long as it is submitted electronically. Please make sure that the application is complete when submitted, and do not send it in bits and pieces over the course of several days or weeks. Second, when submitting your application, please reference Historic Property Grant Program and the historic property name or address in the subject line of your email. If you have to send multiple emails due to attachment size, please use the same subject line on all messages so they can easily be grouped together and located by staff. Also, please clearly label your attachments and list them in the body of your email so that staff can confirm receipt of all intended attachments or be able to quickly identify any that may be missing. Now on to the application. Historic property. Write the historic property name here. If the property has no name, just put the street address. Photographs. A defining photo of your property should be inserted into the field on page 1. In addition, you are required to submit no more than 6 8.5 by 11-inch pages of good, clear, well-proportioned photographs that document the exterior conditions of the property. The defining photo should be more of a general view of the property or a specific building where grant funds would be used, while the additional photos should show the specific areas where work will be completed in detail. Each page must be labeled with the name and address of the property, the date the photos were taken, and a brief description of what each photo captures. For example, east side or close-up of chimney. An example page is provided at the end of the application instructions. If it is easier for you, the Supplemental Photo Pages document can be used to insert your photos and captions into a pre-formatted form for submittal. Amount requested. Provide the amount of funding you are requesting. This number should be identical to the number shown in the Total Grant Request field in your budget on the following page, and should not exceed $50,000. Applicant information. At the bottom of the first page, provide the contact information for somebody who can answer questions about your application. If you are from an organization such as a church, pick one person who can do this and provide an email address where we can send information via email, a phone number that has voicemail, and a mailing address so that we can send official correspondence. Brief project description. Provide a succinct description of the work to be performed and how the proposed work addresses the current condition of the property. This answer should break down and explain the rationale for any work items proposed in the budget. You want to keep this succinct enough that it fits in this part of the form. Really fine-grained details can be gleaned from the contractor estimates and proposals that will accompany the budget. If your project is part of a larger scope of work on the property, that's fine to mention, but this space should focus on the grant-funded work specifically. You could talk more about a larger project or concurrent work that is not grant-funded in question number 8. As you fill out the answers in the application, try to keep the 3 C's in mind. You want your application to be clear, concise, and compelling. Budget. This is where you will provide detail on how grant funds would be used and how you would provide your match. If you have more than one work item, try to put each one on its own line in the budget. Sometimes the planning board will award partial grants, and this makes it easier for them to do that. Now look at the bottom of the budget. There are 2 totals, one for amount of funding requested and one for the total project cost. The amount of funding requested is your grant request. Your total project cost is what your project costs overall. The grant cannot fund the entire project. At the very least, you have a required 10% match that should be accounted for in the budget. Here's an example of a project budget. In this example, the scope of work includes masonry repairs, window repairs, and replacement of the roof. Each item is listed on its own line, and the numbers on each line add up as you go from left to right. For the masonry repairs, the applicant is showing a total cost of $7,100, of which they are requesting $5,500 in grant funds and providing $1,500 in cash and $100 of donated materials toward their required match. If donated materials will be used toward your match, they must be well documented. In this example, the masonry contractor should reflect the donation of $100 worth of material in their estimate. For the window repairs, the applicant is showing a total cost of $12,100, of which they are requesting $11,000 in grant funds and providing $1,100 of in-kind labor toward their required match. If in-kind labor will be used toward your match, it must also be well documented. In this example, the window repair contractor should reflect the value of their in-kind labor in their estimate. For the roof replacement, the applicant is showing a total cost of $11,000, of which they are requesting $10,000 in grant funds and providing $1,000 of cash toward the required match. Each line item in the budget must be supported by an estimate from a qualified contractor in order to substantiate the cost of the work. Get as many estimates as you would like, but only base your budget on and include one for each line item. If you feel you need to explain why you chose this particular firm or contractor, feel free. Note that submitting a given estimate does not lock you in to using that contractor or bid. It just confirms that your budget is grounded in fact. Grant reviewers tend to zero in on items that are not backed up by estimates, which will likely lead to lower application scores. Grant applications are scored using 12 criteria, which are grouped into 3 categories. These can be found on page 6 of the application instructions. You will only need to address 8 of these via your answers to the questions in the application. The other 4, outlined here in blue, are inherent to the proposal, and you won't need to worry about them as much. Now I'll briefly go through all the criteria and what they mean. Historical and cultural significance of the resource, worth up to 10 points. What is historically and/or culturally significant about your property? Ask yourself if the property's historic fabric is intact, or has the character been eroded? Does the property have historical or cultural significance to Prince George's County? This is your chance to stress the unique qualities of your historic property. If your property is already a Prince George's County historic site, you can copy and paste the summary from the property's inventory form. If you need assistance locating the inventory form, please reach out to historic preservation staff who can assist you. If your property is listed on the National Register of Historic Places, or is a contributing resource in a Prince George's County or National Register historic site, make sure to point that out. Urgency of need for financial assistance, worth up to 5 points. Briefly describe how the property may be endangered or whether there is a unique window of opportunity to undertake the project at this time, such as the availability of additional funding. This question is not meant to address your personal financial situation, which the planning board is forbidden from evaluating in this process. Historical and cultural diversity. Does your property's historical and cultural significance make it stand out from the rest of the applicants? For example, if most of the applications are from contributing resources in historic districts that derive their significance from being part of the suburban development of the county, and one application is for a railroad building, the railroad building's historical and cultural significance will stand out as unique. Diversity of resource types. Is your property's category unique among the pool of applicants? For example, if there is an application for an 18th century church building, and all the other applications are for late 19th century houses, the church will stand out as a unique type of resource. Equitable county-wide distribution of funds and sustainable communities. Applications receive a score based on the location of the property in relation to the pool of applicants. If several applications are received from a councilmanic district and only one is received from another district, that singular application will receive a slightly higher score for this criterion. Sustainable communities. Similarly, if a property is located within a designated sustainable community, the application will automatically receive 5 points. Sustainable Communities is a program of the Maryland Department of Planning that is administered by the County Planning Department and is meant to encourage sustainable development, which includes preservation and rehabilitation of historic resources. The next criteria, grouped into the categories of project and project management, are once again ones that you will have the opportunity to speak to with the answers you provide in your application. Please note that the next two criteria are worth up to 15 points each, so having a proposed project that aligns with them and being able to explain how it does so will be a very important part of the application. Retention of historically significant material or details. If the property has more extensive and/or original materials, features, and finishes, is extra effort being expended in their retention? If it is, explain how this will be accomplished. Provision for long-term resource preservation. Most projects score relatively well with this criterion. Your project should have at least one component that contributes to the long-term preservation of the property, something that will enable the property to survive through the years. Think about how your project could address this criterion and how you will describe it. The extent to which the project will stimulate or promote other preservation activities. The extent to which a given project will stimulate or promote other preservation activities will be embodied in project and property itself, and this will be determined in the overall review of your application. However, if you can demonstrate that your project will accomplish these goals in a specific way, please describe it under this criterion. Readiness to initiate and complete the project. Describe your readiness to initiate and complete the project. Are you ready to start? Do you have the funds necessary to begin immediately? Do you have a clear title to the property? Administrative capability. Do you have previous experience managing preservation projects? Are you a good manager and/or bookkeeper? Have you managed contractors before? Have you applied for and received other grants that you administered successfully? Administrative capability is not only shown by a good response to this question, it will also be conveyed throughout the entire application. A high score in administrative capability will be given for neat applications where every question has been answered, the budget is fully detailed, each photo is labeled correctly, and every important piece of information has been provided. Demonstrated community interest and support. This is your chance to show that others are involved or interested in your project. You can ask your local elected officials or other community leaders to provide support via a letter. Please list no more than 5. These letters should be signed, addressed to the planning board, and included with the application materials. Applicant certification. Everyone who signs the application should read the fine print carefully because they will all be agreeing to these terms. The first area is for the applicant to sign and certify that they understand and agree to the grant program terms. Property owner certification. There are 2 areas for 2 property owners to sign. If you have more owners, we can figure out a way to include them. Just let staff know. Corporate resolution. If the applicant is an incorporated municipality, church, or other nonprofit organization, this section will be signed instead of the property owner certification section. This certification must be completed and signed by someone in the organization who has the authority to agree to the terms of the grant program. Preservation easement. In general, an easement is defined as a non-possessory legal right to use or enter onto the real property of someone else for a specified purpose. Imagine that the concept of property ownership is represented by a bundle of sticks. Each stick is a property right that the landowner has. The landowner may sell or give away all of the rights, or a limited set of them. These rights may include the right to occupy the property, construct improvements on the property, subdivide the property, and transfer the property. The basic premise of the preservation easement that is required by this grant program is that in return for the grant funds, the owner will grant an easement to the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission, which will require the owner to seek approval from the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission on any change to the property designated in the agreement. The preservation easement required by the Historic Property Grant Program is a legal agreement between the property owner, referred to as the grantor, and the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission, referred to as the grantee, to preserve and protect the significant historical, cultural, architectural, and/or archaeological attributes of the historic resource where grant funds will be used. Here are some things that the preservation easement does and does not do. The easement does contain binding and enforceable covenants that run with the land in perpetuity. These covenants obligate the owner and all subsequent owners to refrain from actions that are incompatible with the preservation of the historic resource and/or compromise its historic integrity, including the requirement to obtain approval from the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission prior to making changes to the historic property in the form of exterior alterations, additions, or other new construction. Because the Maryland Land Use Law that enables the Historic Property Grant Program requires these easement agreements to be perpetual, any existing mortgages, liens, or other title encumbrances must be subordinated or otherwise resolved before the easement can be recorded, so that the easement is recorded in first position on the property title. Property owners are responsible for working with their mortgage lender or any other necessary parties to obtain mortgage subordination or other necessary resolutions before the easement can be recorded. A title examination will be done to identify any encumbrances on the title. The easement does require the property owner to refrain from certain actions and seek approval from the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission for others. The easement does not constitute any ownership of the property by the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission. The easement is required as a condition of receiving an award through the Prince George's County Historic Property Grant Program. The easement requires the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission to routinely monitor the property to ensure adherence with the terms of the easement via an annual inspection. The easement provides the property owner and subsequent owners with technical assistance from Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission staff. The restrictions included in the preservation easement language are generally similar to the restrictions that are already in effect for Prince George's County historic sites. Since County Historic Site designation is required as a condition of this program, all properties will be subject to the regulatory oversight that comes along with that designation, which includes seeking prior approval for changes to the property via the Historic Area Work Permit process. Since this protection is already in place, you may be wondering why the preservation easement is also necessary. Because the easement is a private agreement between the property owners and the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission in perpetuity, it adds an extra layer of protection. In the event that the county code is ever changed and the Historic Preservation Ordinance is weakened, the preservation easement would remain, ensuring that the public money that has been invested into the historic resource remains protected. Another financial incentive that is offered to owners of Prince George's County historic sites is the Historic Property Tax Credit Program. To summarize, this program provides a credit worth 25% of the total cost of qualified rehabilitation expenses incurred at county historic sites, and 10% of the cost of qualified expenses related to compatible new construction within a county historic district. The credit is applied to the county portion of the property tax bill and may be utilized for up to 10 years following the year that the eligible work is completed, or until the balance of the credit is fully utilized, whichever comes first. The credit is issued as a refund after the full property tax bill is paid. Property owners with qualified rehabilitation expenses can apply for the tax credit up to 5 years after the work is completed. For more information on the tax credit program, please please visit the following website: https://www.pgplanning.org/focus-areas/tax-credits/. Here is an example of how the tax credit would work for a county historic site that has an annual property tax bill of $1,500 and has completed $25,000 worth of qualified rehabilitation work. The work was completed in July of 2023, which is fiscal year 2024, as the county fiscal year begins on July 1st. The property owner applied for the tax credit in September of 2025, which was in fiscal year 2026. And the application is approved by the Prince George's County Historic Preservation Commission, resulting in a credit worth $6,250. The credit is applied to the county portion of the property tax bill for up to 10 years, beginning in fiscal year 2025, the year after the work was completed. Since the property tax bill for fiscal year 2025 was already paid, the property owner is issued a refund in the amount of $1,500 from the County Office of Finance for that year. After the property owner pays their property tax bill for fiscal year 2026, they are issued a second refund in the amount of $1,500 for the County Office of Finance for that year. The remaining $3,250 tax credit balance continues to be issued in this manner until the full value has been utilized. The County Tax Credit Program and Historic Property Grant Program have some similarities and differences that I want to briefly highlight. They are similar in that they both are available to county historic sites and districts, require an approved historic area work permit before any work that would change the exterior, materials, or appearance of the property is undertaken, issue funds as reimbursements after the work is completed and documentation of payment has been received and reviewed. They are different in that the tax credit program is generally not as competitive. The application for the tax credit program is completed and submitted after the work is complete rather than before. The Historic Preservation Commission approves the tax credit application rather than the Planning Board. There is no easement requirement. The tax credit program is faster due to the lack of easement requirement and lack of contract. The work can begin as soon as any necessary permits have been secured. In this way, the tax credit is a much better option for offsetting the cost of projects that are urgent and cannot wait for the complex grant process to wrap up before being started. The tax credit program has a rolling application period where applications are accepted at any time throughout the year, rather than during a fixed application period like the grant program. Some key points to remember. New applications are due August 28th, with revisions and additional information accepted until September 11th. The program is competitive and funding is not guaranteed. Try to keep your application clear, concise, and compelling. Grant-funded work cannot be initiated until the required historic preservation easement has been recorded in the land records, which can take 1 year or longer depending on the existence of mortgages, liens, or other entitle encumbrances, and whether the property is already a county historic site. Any work completed before this step cannot be reimbursed. The program is reimbursement-based. The Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission will reimburse grantees after inspecting completed work and verifying payment information. Awards may be taxable. The Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission will issue a 1099 for any reimbursement payments that are issued to a grant recipient each year. Please consult a tax professional if you have concerns about this. For questions about the Historic Property Grant Program, please contact Daniel Tana in the Prince George's County Planning Department's Historic Preservation section. Daniel can be reached via email at daniel.tana@ppd.mncppc.org or at historicpreservation@ppd.mncppc.org or via telephone at 301-952-3574. Thank you for taking the time to attend a grant workshop. We hope that it's been helpful and makes the application process more understandable. This concludes the presentation.